Every single day, humanity pours more than 2 billion cups of this. It employs 25 million farming families. It has been banned by emperors, blessed by a pope, and blamed for at least one revolution. It is the most popular psychoactive drug on earth, and it's completely, cheerfully legal. But here's the part nobody tells you. The drink was never the point. The point was a room that only existed because of the drink. And everything that walked out of that room. The insurance industry. The stock exchange. The newspaper. Arguably, modern science itself. So today, we reach back 1,000 years to a hillside in Ethiopia, and we make sure nobody ever picks that berry. No cup, no room, no mercy for Mondays. Welcome to the IffyVerse. If coffee was never discovered. The legend goes like this. Around 1,000 years ago, an Ethiopian goatherd named Kaldi noticed his goats eating red berries off a shrub, and then dancing. He tried the berries himself. Historians would like you to know this story was written down 800 years later and is almost certainly marketing. But the shrub was real. The first people we can actually prove drank coffee were Sufi monks in 15th century Yemen, who brewed the roasted beans to stay awake for midnight prayers. It worked. Word of the not-sleeping juice spread up the Red Sea, and the Yemeni port of Mocha became the world's first coffee monopoly. Every bean on earth shipped through one town. By the 1500s, Mecca, Cairo, and Istanbul were full of coffeehouses. A brand new kind of room where men who weren't family could sit, argue, and stay suspiciously alert. Authorities hated it. Coffee was banned in Mecca in 1511. One Ottoman sultan made drinking it a capital offense. It didn't matter. You cannot execute your way out of a Monday. Europe got its first taste around 1600. The story goes that priests asked Pope Clement VIII to ban the sinister foreign drink, and he tasted it and baptized it instead. Probably didn't happen, definitely didn't stop it. In 1652, London opened its first coffee house. Within 50 years, there were hundreds of them. Boosters claimed thousands. Admission cost 1 penny, and for that penny you got coffee, newspapers, and permission to argue with strangers of any class. They called them penny universities. And here's where a hot drink starts running the world. Merchants who needed shipping news gathered at Edward Lloyd's coffee house. That became Lloyd's of London, the insurance market. Stockbrokers, kicked out of the Royal Exchange for being too loud, moved into Jonathan's coffee house. That became the London Stock Exchange. Newspapers, auction houses, entire scientific feuds. All of it ran on rooms that charged a penny and served questions. One coffeehouse argument in 1684, as the story is usually told, sent Edmund Halley to ask Isaac Newton a question about gravity. The answer became the Principia, the most important physics book ever written. And underneath all of it, one quiet chemical swap. For centuries, the safest everyday drinks in Europe were beer and wine, and people started at breakfast. Then, in a single century, the continent's default drink went from a depressant to a stimulant. Historians still argue about how much that mattered. The Enlightenment, you'll notice, did not happen in a pub. So let's swing the hammer. Same world, one change. In that Yemeni monastery, nobody ever roasts the bean. The bitter little berry stays what it had always been. Goat food, no cup, no coffee house, no Mondays with mercy. What breaks? Start small. Mocha stays a fishing town. The Ottoman Empire never gets the coffee house, and that's a bigger loss than it sounds. Because the coffee house was a social invention as much as a drink. A third place that wasn't home, work, or worship. Open to anyone with small change. Remove the bean, and that room has no reason to exist. Now, the obvious objection, tea. Caffeine had other passports. Tea reaches Europe around the same time either way, and in our timeline it eventually conquered Britain anyway. But tea arrived expensive, and it was drunk at home, in parlors, by people who already knew each other. Coffee built the public room first, and the institutions grew inside that room. Same drug, wrong furniture. So London in 1700 looks different. Marine insurance still gets invented. Italians had versions centuries earlier. But without Lloyd's front table, it pulls slower. Maybe in Amsterdam. Brokers with no Jonathans keep shouting in the street. England still gets rich. It just does its networking damp. Halley's question for Newton still gets asked eventually. Newton was Newton, but the nudge comes later. From a slower room. Score 1 for the quiet hinges. Sometimes history isn't the genius, it's whoever buys the genius a hot drink and asks. France still gets its Enlightenment. Voltaire, who supposedly drank 40 cups a day, simply has to vibrate at his natural frequency. Salons run on wine, either way. But cheap, sober, public argument metabolizes slower. And when Paris rises in 1789, and it still rises, bread prices don't care about beverages. The lawyer who shouted the crowd into revolt from a cafe table is shouting from somewhere else. The revolution keeps the anger. It loses the venue. Across the Atlantic, the Boston Tea Party still happens. That was about taxes, not taste. But in our timeline, rejecting tea meant switching to coffee, and drinking it became a patriotic personality trait. Without the alternative, America stays a tea nation, which means the entire American century runs on the same leaf as the empire it left. Awkward. Then the big one, the plantation map. In our timeline, coffee remade whole countries. Brazil became the world's coffee warehouse. The boom built railways, ports, and Sao Paulo, and pulled in millions of immigrants. Colombia, Costa Rica, later, Vietnam. National economies balanced on this one bean. Erase it, and 19th century Latin America grows slower and stranger, and Ethiopia loses what becomes its biggest export. And the receipt has one line printed in a different color. Coffee, like sugar, was a slavery crop. Saint-Domingue grew half the world's supply on stolen lives. Brazil ran coffee on slavery until 1888. No, coffee doesn't end that horror. Sugar remains. But one of its engines never gets built. Some timelines don't lose things, they're spared them. The Industrial Revolution still comes. Steam engines don't drink. But the humans minding them do. And factory time was caffeine time. The shift, the deadline, the 5 a.m. whistle all pair badly with breakfast beer. Tea eventually covers Britain's tab. The rest of the world clocks in groggier, and nobody ever invents the coffee break. Which, by the way, was only named in 1952. By a coffee ad campaign. Of course it was. Fast forward to now. No espresso. Italy has to be iconic about something else. No cafe on every corner. No laptop worker camping in one. No $5 cup with your name spelled wrong. The all-nighter. The road trip. The night shift. The newsroom. All of it still exists. All of it is just harder. And tomorrow morning your alarm still goes off at 6. In this timeline, that's the whole news story. Time for history's receipt. 2 billion daily cups, refunded. London's penny universities, never opened. Lloyd's of London and the Stock Exchange, relocated to a slower century. The Principia, delayed, politely. American independence, still brewed, differently steeped. Brazil's railways, Ethiopia's exports, Vietnam's second act, cancelled or rewritten. Millions enslaved on coffee estates, spared. Sugar's ledger, tragically, still stands. The coffee break, never named. Total due, 1 unroasted berry, paid in yawns. Here's the thing about coffee. The chemical was never the point. Tea proved the same molecule could live quietly at home. Coffee's real invention was the room. A penny at the door, strangers at the table, and an argument worth staying awake for. Kill the bean, and the ideas still come. They just show up later, tired and underdressed. History doesn't just run on calories, it runs on conversation, and somebody has to keep it awake. New sign on the post. One more jar for the shelf. The next timeline is already loading.